Well, hello guys, and welcome back to another Rick and Morty review. In this episode, we're taking a look at Tiny Rick! Tiny Rick, motherfuckers! Actually, the episode's called Big Trouble in Little Sanchez, but I always forget that fact, and I just call it Tiny Rick, because that's basically what it is. In a time long before Pickle Rick, this was the big thing. Tiny Rick. And from what I can tell, people like this. Because I remember people shouting, much like how they're doing right now with Pickle Rick. Because that episode aired, 2 weeks ago now? This episode, people were always chanting, Tiny Rick. But, I never thought it was that great. Okay, that's not wrong. Okay, that's wrong. What I mean is, the whole plot with Tiny Rick, I don't really care for. But the B plot with Beth and Jerry, I actually think is a lot more interesting. It's probably the only exception of this rule, but it was bound to happen eventually, right? So let's just get right into it. So it starts off, someone died at the school, and Rick's like, oh, it's a vampire, right? Because vampires are real and shit. Which, yeah, okay, of course they'd exist in this universe. And Summer wants to go kill the vampire with Rick, but Rick's like, who gives a shit, right? Waste of my time and all that. And Beth and Jerry get in another fight, so Rick decides to take them for marriage counseling, right? He drops them off at some intergalactic marriage counseling place that's supposed to fix their marriage, right? So we've got our two plots. Well, it starts off like it's going to be that way, right? One side's killing a vampire, the other side's working on marriage counseling, even though that's a misdirection of expectations, because the vampire is really not important. But the marriage counseling, I love this idea of how they do this. So they put them into like this chair with Bill Cipher on the computer, right? Nice little detail. And when they scan their heads of perceptions of their partner, it creates these amalgamations, right? Jerry becomes a spine... In Beth's mind, Jerry is the spineless worm. And in Jerry's mind, Beth is a xenomorph-looking thing. They're both fine designs, right? Especially Beth. The Beth mytholog is great. And then we see how these mythologs work, right? How the idea is that they're what the other couple imagines it, so they're not real, right? They're not self-aware. They can't work together, right? They can't communicate. They're not real. They're just monsters. It's a great idea. I honestly, this one idea right here could be like a show in and of itself. It probably is when it comes to anime. I wouldn't know. Well, whatever. But we see that so we see the mythologs, and the Beth and Jerry mythologs are actually working together, right? They're not, because the mythologs are supposed to hate and kill each other, but the Beth mytholog is able to use the Jerry mytholog. It's interesting. And then we cut to Rick, and he's put his mind into the body of a teenager to become Tiny Rick, right? And they go and they kill the vampire, but everybody loves Tiny Rick because he's Tiny Rick. He's the most popular kid in school. Everybody loves him, right? Okay. It's it's not the it's putting Rick in the dimensions of high school, right? Which, I mean, like, if they were really going to put Rick in the dimensions of high school, that's kind of not what they did. They just made him popular, and instead they decided to focus on something else. Because Rick goes to put his mind back in his old body, but they get invited to a party, or they throw a party, I can't really tell. It kind of looks the same. And the party... And Rick decides, screw being old Rick. I'm just going to be Tiny Rick and let's go to this kick-ass party. And at this party, he sings a song, Let Me Out. And it's basically about how he's an old man who's dying in the garage and how he's dying inside, right? So the episode, even though it starts off about vampires, they quickly get rid of that. And instead we're focusing on Tiny Rick, which is Rick's mind stuck inside a teenage body with all the hormone and angst of a teenager. Again, a fine idea for an episode, and yet I think they push it off into a different direction. But we cut back to Beth and Jerry, and their mythologs are codependent, right? So they break out of jail and they just start killing people, which, I mean, like, it's not the most violent gore ever, really. I mean, like, Pickle Rick definitely did it a lot better, but that's not the point, right? It's the idea that their marriage, because he even says, you are the most dysfunctional relationship I have ever seen. The idea that your marriage is so fucked up that even your mythologs are codependent, right? The worst case he's ever seen. It's an interesting concept. And I feel like I don't think they don't explore it enough. I definitely would have liked to see it explored more. They go for more of less than more, but they don't go for too much less, if that makes any sense. But Jerry decides to hide out, right? Oh, hide in a cupboard. Maybe he won't die, right? Remember Morty Night Run? Jerry's don't survive in space, right? He'd totally fucking die. Well, I guess Rick Potion number 9 doesn't really count. But Beth gets captured, right? Beth gets captured and Jerry runs away. And we see Jerry, and his mytholog is just pathetic, right? It's a spineless worm. It's just, it's pathetic. It's sticking its butt out. It's almost like actual Jerry, right? But he's upset, and he decides he's going to go save his wife, right? We cut back to Tiny Rick, and Summer confronts him and is like, this isn't you, right? You're doing what all teenagers do in suppressing your negative emotions deep down inside, and because Rick is nothing but negative emotions, the real Rick has been basically completely suppressed, and he can only be expressed through his teenage angst. At least I think that's what they're trying to say. To this day, this part, how they're doing this, still confuses me exactly. So, did it create like a new Rick personality? Did Tiny Rick already have the Tiny Rick teenage brain? And this is just it becoming self-aware, right? And it's repressing the original Rick. I'm still not entirely sure. And that's part of my problem. And I know, it's not, just understanding how it works. It shouldn't be that big of a problem. But it kind of is when it's the core element to the episode. Because Summer doesn't like Tiny Rick. Summer wants to put Tiny Rick back in old Rick's body because he's slowly dying or something like that. I don't entirely... I don't get it. But Summer's just being a pain in the ass. And they go to the dance that night, right? Morty's using Tiny Rick. Well, whether he's kind of unaware of what's going on, Summer tells him and he doesn't care. Because he's using Tiny Rick to get with Jessica, which is his endless trophy that he will never achieve. But Tiny Rick does a dance about dying in the garage, right? Let me out. And then the principal comes up to him and is like, you killed the gym coach, and while yes, he was a vampire, I'm still going to have to expel you. So Tiny Rick gets mad at Summer, tells her to fuck off, right? That she's a psycho nerd who ruined Tiny Rick, and now everyone hates Summer, right? It's... God, it's high school flashbacks all over again. People just being petty and... Actually, it doesn't matter. And then we cut back to Beth and Jerry. And basically, the evil xenomorph Beth reveals that Jerry is super subservient, right? And that Beth's wasting his potential. And that the way Jerry views Beth is that she is the strongest, smartest being alive, right? So the evil xenomorph Beth is exactly that, the strongest, smartest being alive. And it starts cloning Jerry's because Jerry's are super subservient and makes an army of them. And then Jerry busts in, tries to kill them. He looks badass for about a second. I think they're trying to kind of do what Rick Potion number 9 did. And it kind of works. And Beth creates these really buff Jerrys to beat up the evil worm Jerrys. Well, the worm Jerrys. And I love the Jerrys that are just self-congratulation, right? Those are really funny. And then we cut back to Tiny Rick, who he goes to kill Big Rick, right? But instead gets thwarted by them, and we actually get a fight between Rick and Morty, right? Tiny Rick fights Morty, and the idea that, oh, I'm gonna take one out of Rick's book and kick your ass. That's a pretty good scene. This episode is somewhat funny. It's not very often, but every once in a while they'll throw out a good joke, right? Not often, but when they're there, they hit. And he listens to some music, right? Feel what he's feeling, and he's able to fully become normal Rick again, kind of, through his teen angst. Again, it still kind of makes no sense, but whatever. And yeah. Rick's able to get back into his body, and he's been working on this Project Phoenix, which is basically him cloning himself in order to live forever. But because of this experience, he realizes Project Phoenix isn't going to work, so he just brutally murders all of his clones, right? Okay. Okay. Yeah, sure, it's violent decapitation, but it's fucking funny. And then we cut back to Beth and Jerry, and Jerry realizes that, oh, the perfect version of me would see you as a goddess, right? So he puts the helmet on one of the buff Jerrys, and it basically makes a goddess Beth who kills the evil Beth. In therapy, Rick says at the beginning, oh, they have 100% success rate. It technically works for them for now. I mean, season 3, But, yeah, Rick comes and gets them, right? And says, and Jerry's like, oh, our adventures were connected by theme. No, not really, right? Because Rick's back to being an asshole, right? Nothing's changed. And then the end credit scene is the coach vampire was Coach Ferratu, and the vampire king, or whatever the hell he is, leader, is pissed off, and it's like, we need more subtlety in vampires, because fuck it, right on, right? We're in a post-Twilight era. We don't need this kind of shit. And that's where it ends. It's a fine episode. I like the Beth and Jerry plot a lot more than I like the Rick and Morty plot. Tiny Rick is just kind of annoying, and I feel like they won't commit to a concept. Oh, we're gonna do vampire killing. Psych. Oh, we're gonna do high school. Psych. Oh, we're gonna do teen angst. Okay, I guess we'll focus on that for a little bit. Oh, we're going to focus on how horrible high school is. Psych. We're going to go back to teen angst, right? It's just kind of all over the place. At least the Beth and Jerry plot has structure, and I enjoyed it, right? But I hope you all enjoyed. Stay tuned for more. Until next time, peace.